not coming, right? Okay.
One can of
Okay.
that's all I have.
So you ready? You guys ready?
Nothing else.
Yes.
Okay.
No, I think we should
He's,
open
he's
it up.
half, his father, on his father's side, he's 100%
Just so,
wolf.
you know, so that they can cover it.
And so
Are
this,
they going to speak?
All right, we will call the planning commission meeting to order at, looks like right on 9 o'clock. And it looks that like all commissioners are present except Commissioner Ogle, who is absent by arrangement. Do we have a determination of legal notice?
All items have been properly noticed.
Is there a director's report?
yes, Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission. The only thing I really wanted to update the Planning Commission on is really on the fire update, fire recovery issues. So at this point, we have issued 16 building permits for the area. All I have is that the majority of them are mobile homes. I was out in the field a couple of days ago and did see stick-built construction going on in the area of West Road. So we're starting to see more and more rebuilds coming along. And part of reason I was out there is to take a look at some of these sites that are being cleared by the Army Corps. There's been some issues, whether they've been scraped too much. So part of why I was out in the field was to take a look at some of the scrapes. And most of them were in order as far as what they were supposed to be. Because typically they're scraping down to the bottom of the footings of the foundation. And most of these appeared to be in conformance. I think I only saw one that had excess debris on it. We had not cleared it yet. But for the most part, the 4 sites that I visited, 3 of them looked fine. Yes.
I just wanted to ask, just for my own information, is once they scrape like that, how do people refill and compact that fill? I mean, where do they get fill if the contaminated stuff is removed? I was really unclear on what happens then after that scraping.
So if I may, to the chair, what the Department of Transportation right now has offered free fill for a lot of these sites. People just have to contact the Department of Transportation. They have to have an engineering contractor or a contractor on board that actually knows what they're doing, because you just can't go back and fill in the hole with dirt. Actually, you have to go in there and do the compactions. And again, if they choose to rebuild in the same footprint, they're going to have to do compactions and testings. If they decide to build on a different site on the property that was not affected, then those requirements wouldn't kick in. It's where that soil has been disturbed, that native soil, and they have to come back and do the compactions. So the proper way to do it would be A, obtain a grading permit, B, obtain the fill, and then compact it under the direction of an engineer. So again, what the Department of Transportation is trying to avoid is just the dumping of soil into these holes without doing proper compaction. But the Department of Transportation has offered the soil for free.
I'm so glad to know they have it, because I was worried about where would they come up with it.
Yeah, there's a lot of places where fill is available, but the DOT has graciously offered that to the folks out in Redwood Valley.
Thank you.
The other thing, the Army Corps has advised that they are looking at being done with the debris removal by the end of the month, by the 28th. They should be done, although they will not be completely out of the area because they still have to do testing and retesting of some of the sites. So when they do scrape, they will test, and if they come back with contaminants still in the soil, they will do another rescrape until those contaminants are gone or acceptable. So again, we see that the contractors should be demobilized and the Corps demobilized towards the end of the month. However, there'll still be folks in the area doing testing. Relative to the administrative permits that the county has been issuing for the temporary occupancy of the travel trailers, 39 have been issued. A total of 48 have been applied for. So roughly we have about 10 more to go to issue. But a total of 48 were applied for this program. So with that, that'll conclude my director's report.
Any questions for staff on the director's report?
I've got a question. Was there any progress that was made on identifying house plans that could be pre-approved through the building department to aid people in the rebuilding?
At this point, if I may through the chair, we had talked about that, but the issue was that we were looking at what the city of Fort Bragg had previously done, and we can't really use those plans. And again, a lot of it has to do with copyright regulations and so on. So the answer is no, we don't have any approved plans that we can provide folks with. I think architects, designers would have to come forth and maybe provide that. I mean, we're still looking into it, but we don't have anything right now to report that we have active.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. Now is the time that the Planning Commission welcomes participation in the commission meetings. This item is limited to matters under the jurisdiction of the commission and that are not on the posted agenda, and items which have not already been considered by the commission. No action can be taken. Is there anyone who wishes to address the commission? Seeing none, we will move on to the consent calendar. And there are no items on the consent calendar, so we will move to the regular calendar, case UR 2013-0002.
Thank you. My name's Juliana Cherry. I'm a planner with Mendocino County Planning and Building Services, and I'm presenting a renewal for a use permit for camping at Wildwood Campground, which is located on Highway 20, just east of the city of Fort Bragg. The original use permit was issued in 1972 and renewed for a 20-year period. And then we're at the conclusion of the 20-year period, and they applied for a renewal again. They applied in 2013, and we've been working very closely with the property owner to craft recommendations, and we conducted several site visits. The state came out and participated. The state licenses camping sites. They came out, and environmental health participated, as well as code enforcement in some of the site visits. The site characteristics include elevation change. The campground is basically on a plateau. It's kind of hard to identify as a plateau because the 60-some acres, 65 acres are very thickly vegetated with beautiful trees. It looks like a great place to spend the day hiking and to camp. Just a really wonderful treasure near the coast to see such beautiful redwood trees. Just yesterday, I did receive from the Department of Fish and Wildlife, which is a state agency, that they concurred with some of the recommendations that staff was making regarding the original use permit allowed for two-phase development, and staff, as you'll hear, is recommending that the second phase, which has not been implemented and the property owner is not seeking to implement at this time, we're recommending that we remove that phase 2 from the use permit as we move forward. Department of Fish and Wildlife concurred with this because over the last 40 years, the standards and the identification of sensitive plants and animals has changed and become more refined. And they're concerned that adjacent to this property is pygmy forest, maybe not on the property, but we haven't surveyed for that. And also they're concerned about bishop pine. So they were glad to hear that no new development was proposed, but I just received those comments yesterday. The campsite was originally approved for 73 camps. The campground was originally approved for 73 campsites. We've done a variety of site visits and have determined that currently there are 75 campsites on the property. It was also approved to have a manager's unit, and there is a manager that lives on site in a mobile home. EH has issued a capacity permit for septic on the site. So it's, I think, 5,700 gallons capacity of septic, and Dave Jensen's here to answer any questions if you have questions about septic capacity. So there's a formula for translating that capacity into how many campsites could have septic hookup. They also have a dump station on the site, and then there are 2 campgrounds that have been long occupied by the property owner and a family member, and those have recently had a separate septic installed, so they're no longer using the dump station at those 2 campsites, and those 2 campsites are discreetly separated from the campground. So the property is zoned and allows for, under a use permit, a campground land use. And campground services is a transient habitation use type, and they're intended for areas for travelers in recreation vehicles or tents. The zoning code specifically talks about a 30-day or less as being transient occupancy. And what we've found is many of the campsites, including those with hookups, are rented on a month-to-month basis. So they're occupied on more than a 30-day basis, which is in conflict with the use permit. And we've really talked quite a bit with the property owner about that, and have really struggled to find a way to close this divergence between the practice on the property and the use permit. As I mentioned earlier, phased implementation was intended with the original use permit, and staff is recommending a condition that basically would remove the phase 2 101 tent campsites from the use permit when it's renewed. And if the property owner wishes to have additional campsites, they would come in and amend their use permit or apply for a new use permit. Staff feels that 40 years ago, how we would have regulated campsites is different than we would do today. And since they've never been implemented, we would want an opportunity to really look at that second phase and condition it appropriately so that it would have the most success. And when people come to Mendocino County to camp, they would find a really fine camping experience at Wildwood Campgrounds. As I mentioned, the use permit has been renewed twice previously, each for a 20-year term. By condition, staff is recommending a 10-year term, which would commence with year 2013 and conclude on June 1st, 2023. In reviewing the site, we have substantial concerns about the last 20 years at the campground and the activities that we've seen, and we feel we'd like to give the campground owner the opportunity to really demonstrate great success at the property through 2023 and look at renewing the use permit again at the conclusion of a 10-year term. One of the state licenses that they need to obtain is from the Department of Housing and Community Development, and they came out at the county's request and did a variety of inspections and pointed out some areas of improvement that needed to happen at the Wildwood campgrounds. And the property owner very happily complied with those requests and have provided a better, safe environment as a result of having the state come out and point out certain things that needed to be addressed. Staff is recommending a condition that this relationship continue. The state at campsites is not required to come out through their license on an annual basis, but we would like to see a condition adopted where the property owner requests that they come out on an annual basis and identify issues under the license that could be addressed, or identify that things are really working wonderfully there. And I'd also like to mention that there's some discrepancy between our record of the state license and the current state license as far as campsite capacity. So we are anticipating that the property owner will soon provide us with their current state license so that we can confirm that the capacity at that campground is the 73 that is approved under the use permit, or if the state feels that a larger capacity is warranted, we could consider a change in the total capacity of the campground. The state actually specifies the number of, what they call them, what do they call them? We all have our special name for a septic hookup, and the state calls them with drains. And so the state not only specifies the number of campsites, but also the number with drains. And the number with drains correlates to the septic capacity at the site. And this site has a lot of elevation change, so areas for increasing septic capacity could potentially be limited. So if the state is going to increase the number of drains allowed at the site, it really needs to correlate with what environmental health has determined is the appropriate capacity for the septic at the site. Environmental health this last week spent some time looking over the file for septic and has concluded that the septic capacity is 5,700 gallons. And that's really how environmental health looks at septic, but they have 73 potential users of that capacity. And we issue a number of campsites, right? It isn't like you can have campsites for 5,700 gallon capacity of septic. You have 73 campsites. And is the capacity there of the septic large enough for the 73 campsites? And it really operates right at capacity. If there's a maintenance issue or a failure, they're very vulnerable to not having sufficient capacity. And when we've had some very wet seasons, these can put demands on the septic capacity that may make it difficult for those who live on a regular basis to have access to quality effluent disposal. So as I mentioned, many of the people who live on site do not do incidental camping. They have a month-to-month agreement with the property owner to stay in the campsite. So you'll see when you go to the campgrounds that people not only live in their RV, but they put up fences. Their dogs are kenneled on the property. They may have a storage building on the property. Some of them have planted vegetable gardens. So there is many examples of people staying on a longer than 30-day basis at the campground. So let's see here. Staff recommends that we have conditions that remind the property owner of the potential of enforcement. Abandoned vehicles is something that the county has set as a priority and has given authority to our code enforcement office staff to address. And so we've included conditions to remind the property owner that vehicles that are not road ready, that do not have tires on them, maybe don't have wheels on them, that are not registered with the DMV, those are abandoned vehicles. And abandoned vehicles is something that the county takes quite seriously. The Sheriff's Department in 2014 provided me with a record of incident reports. And it was really rather surprising, the number of incidences. Over a 28-month period, there were 464 calls for the sheriff to come out to the campground. Yesterday, the Sheriff's Department provided me with an update, and they had 172 calls over a 24-month period between 15 and 17, October 15 and October 17. So that is a substantial change. It's maybe half of what had been occurring between 2011 and 2013, but still a significant number. So I'd like to conclude with saying that with the variety of information that we've received this week from the Department of Environmental Health, the State Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Sheriff's Office, and then also the property owner has provided the county staff with some information about state regulations regarding long-term habitation that may support their activity, which we find in conflict with the use permit. Staff is requesting that this item be continued to May 3rd, and this will allow staff through the end of March to look at this data and provide more current information to the Planning Commission on May 3rd. If you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions for staff? Roger?
Is it appropriate to, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Is it appropriate to make a comment, or because we're going to continue it, should we not?
I may defer to council, but yes, it is. In other words, the item is being presented to you today, but we're also recommending that this item be continued. So you can make comments on the project. You can take public testimony today. What we're looking at is to continue it to a date certain so that staff can go ahead and resolve some of these issues that have come up. But I'll defer to our council.
I'd like to add that the applicant has also driven here today with the intention of speaking.
Deputy County Counsel Matthew Kudrowski, through the chair. I would in fact invite any comments or questions from the commission that the commission wants us staff to look at between now and May. So deliberations on the matter, I think we would request to hold off on those, but any questions, comments for us to get back to the commission, please give us those.
Then I'd like to state how, unfortunately, the big part of this issue is low-income housing and homelessness. And so I hope that there is a good hard look at what will happen if the sites that have been used long-term are eliminated. Where will those people go? And so if there is any leniency or change or condition that we could put into a use permit renewal that would allow for some longer term habitation under some other category or as a low income housing issue, it's just, I mean, I think the county even gives vouchers for people to live there. And so the county has encouraged, I believe, some long-term rentals there, and people do rely on it. Now, the rest of the conditions are great. I think getting the vehicles registered, doing the health and safety stuff, reducing a few of the campsites if that's what it takes, and especially for the septic capacity, those are great. And even a shorter permit time. But whatever the condition is in here, and I'm not sure which one, maybe you could point it out, that limits the long-term rental use, I hope the county will be a little creative in looking at that.
Commissioner Kruger.
The issue that I had was the term of the permit. The previous permits were 20-year periods, and the staff is recommending that it be reduced to 10 years this time, but it starts at 2013. So it makes it appear that this is really only a 5-year term. How does that work?
I had initially really wanted to recommend a 5-year term. And their use permit actually, if this use permit renewal is not approved, will expire in 2013. And they will have operated for 5 years without a use permit. I really considered my 5-year term to be appropriate given what I was seeing in 2013, the number of calls to the site, the septic wasn't really operating as it was intended, significant public health and safety issues. And so I felt a 5-year term would allow the property owner to really step up and demonstrate that they've changed. And yet it's taken 5 years to bring the application to Planning Commission. So the total of 10 years allows them 5 more years of operation, and they have shown some progress over the last couple of years while we've been working together. And so staff's recommendation was a total of 10 years from the date that it would otherwise expire.
Okay, so what you're really recommending is a functional additional 5 years rather than 10 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
Other questions?
Well, I'd like to echo Commissioner Warner's concern just about the possibility of exacerbating the problem of homelessness on
on the coast or anywhere in the county. And wanted to kind of get into the nuts and bolts of that a little bit. I'm looking at condition 9A, and that's about revoking condition B9 from the original use permit. Might that be the condition that's related to short-term and long-term occupancy? I don't know that I have a good reference point.
Right, and I
for that.
apologize. We had intended to include the original use permit and use permit renewal with the staff report distribution. And I apologize, it was not included. So I will find condition 9A, which is here. No permanent residential units are to be established and maintained with the exception of the existing park manager's facility. So we're recommending eliminating a condition that would have restricted staying longer than 30 days.
Okay, so that does allow for the leniency.
It does.
Okay.
Then it just falls to how we define camping and enforcing that at the property.
Okay, great, thank you. And I do have a couple more questions as well. On page 2, there's a bulleted list on site, and bullet number 3 talks about a renewal of a use permit allowing 174 unit travel trailers. Is that number correct? Bullet 3 on page 2.
Right, I see that. I believe that's for the combination of the 73 phase 1, which has been implemented, and the 101 tent sites of phase 2.
Okay.
And we're recommending that the 101 tent sites on phase 2 be excluded from the
Okay,
renewal.
so that, thank you, that includes the 101 campsites. Couple more questions too. I'm just trying to make sure I understand all these numbers correctly. The incidents that you got from the sheriff's department, definitely alarming in number, the 464 incidents, and I wanted to try and understand that time period better. It says it was between October 2011 and February 2015. Wouldn't that be 40 months and not the 28 months stated? It's still a lot of calls.
Right, you could be absolutely right.
Okay. I think what that would do would be to make it.
Let me just pull the report and look at the dates.
Sure.
So, does it go through 15, right? I have dates for 12 through 14 on a spreadsheet, and then a few from 11 that are individual sheets. So I think it goes through 14.
Through 2014. Okay, so maybe it is that 28-month period. Okay, well, and I just think that would be useful for us, especially when the item comes back to the commission, if we could just kind of clarify those dates, because if it's 28 months or if it's 40 months, it would be useful to know that so that we could compare the most recent statistics against that to see what kind of improvement we're seeing there. Because I think my biggest concern out of this whole project just is that public health and safety component, and that many calls coming in from 911 from one site raised a red flag for me. Okay. So, and then one more thing that I want to make sure I understand correctly. I'm looking at table 1 on page 3, and there is that discrepancy that you mentioned between the use permit allowing for 73 campsites, but 75 allowed on site. So would the applicant be removing campsites?
If we wanted to enforce the 73, and I believe the 2 additional campsites are occupied by the property owner and their family member. They are designated as campsites on the use permit. So if we wanted to enforce the 73 number, then they would need to reduce 2 campsites on the property.
Okay. But that is not currently in the conditions, correct? That would be required to do that?
No, I believe in the conditions, though, I do call out, like on condition 9, the number of campsites is 45 plumbed and 24 unplumbed. And I do that again on condition 11. On
Okay.
9C and D, 11C and D.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So the 45 plumbed and the conditional use permit would be in conflict then with the 51 plumbed observed on site?
Right.
Okay, so
right.
that's, all right. Okay. I think that's it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Matthew.
Through the chair, Deputy County Counsel Matthew Kudrowski, I wanted to address one item from the last exchange, that this isn't necessarily the matter of just the one condition speaking to permanent residency on the site. This is a use permit for transient habitation, and under our zoning code, that's for travelers who are passing through. I think staff is, the concern I have is what we have here versus what we have elsewhere reported for the site of being either a mobile home park or a special occupancy park, and trying to harmonize that in some manner. So I think it's not, I just wanted to put out there, it may not just be deleting one single line. There may be other aspects of this that have to occur, because this wouldn't necessarily be consistent with the zoning code as a permanent mobile home park. And I think staff's happy to continue working and thinking about that. I just didn't want the commission to be thinking it may just be one line deletion that makes that problem go away.
If I may add to that, Nash Gonzalez, PBS Director, it may be that we may have to take a look at this permit again or re-review it and determine, does it need to be for a lack of word, repackaged, because you do have some permits out there that were approved many years ago. They were a combination of RVs / mobile home parks. It may be that this may need to be looked at that way to address the long-term housing issue versus the transient habitation portion of it. Because when this permit was originally approved for, it was transient habitation. It was a campground is what it was. But now what we've seen is long-term occupancy. And so how do we take the long-term occupancy and take that, I'll call it that round peg, and try to put it into a square hole? So it may be that part of what we're looking at is, do we need to take a look at another type of a permit and see if that permit is the appropriate permit for this site? Because again, we can't just change a condition and allow for long-term occupancy under the camping. We have to now look at it as long-term and then define how many are long-term, and then to see, does this permit need to be modified and possibly be a mobile home park? So again, these are some of the things that we'll be looking at between now and May.
Is there any evidence that there has been a transient occupancy, or is it pretty much all permanent occupancy or long-term occupancy?
I've been to the site maybe 4 or 5 times, and I would say the majority of the plumbed sites are permanently occupied on a month-to-month basis. It looks to me maybe 2 to 3 of those plumbed sites are available for temporary camping use, and the tent sites are usually not occupied, but they're available.
And the unplumbed sites use the community wash house or whatever, right?
Right,
for
there's
their
a
septic
nice bathroom
disposal.
facility there with showers.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I did have one more follow-up question, and it relates to the 6 sites with drains that are not allowed under the use permit or or by environmental health, and this might be a question for environmental health. Is there any indication that those 6 sites with the drains are exceeding the septic capacity on site?
Yeah, thanks. David Jensen, former Director of Environmental Health, currently under contract to the county. Could you please restate the question?
Sure. I'm looking at table 1 on page 3 of the staff report, and here it's indicating that the use permit, the state license, and environmental health are allowing for 45 sites with septic hookups, yet observed on the site are 51 campsites with hookups. And I'm just trying to get a sense of, are those 6 sites actually problematic in terms of exceeding capacity of the septic system?
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. And thank you for your patience on this particular aspect of this action. As was stated previously, environmental health has a very difficult time with the term campsites. We view campsites in 2 different aspects. The ones that are connected to the sewer and have water serving that site, we give them a flow of 100 gallons of wastewater per day. Those that are what we call dry sites or unplumbed sites, we rate those at 50 gallons of wastewater per day, primarily through the community bathhouse and the public restroom there. So when we approve the design for septic systems, we look at the total amount of wastewater that's being produced. Excuse me, the total amount of wastewater that's expected to be produced, which is usually different than the total amount that actually is produced. But we look at what the projected wastewater flow, we look at the projected wastewater flow that a septic system can handle. And we then kind of back out, and to answer your question, what we would do is we would back out and say, okay, and I believe I have a memo as part of the file that I drafted just a couple of days ago. Do you happen to have?
I haven't distributed it.
I'm sorry. That's at the risk of droning on and on, perhaps it would be helpful if I read you a paragraph from this memo. I'll read you 2 paragraphs. It'll make better sense. Since 2010, new septic systems have been installed to serve the residents of Wildwood RV Park and campgrounds. One of the new systems was designed to serve 10 sites, 1,000 gallons of wastewater per day. Those are 10 plumbed, 10 sewered sites. And the other was designed to support 31 sites, 3,100 gallons of wastewater per day. An existing leach field was found to be capable of receiving 1,600 gallons of wastewater per day. In total, this network of septic systems was capable of handling 5,700 gallons of wastewater per day. The design for a 1,600-gallon backup system was also approved, but that system has not been installed. Installation of the final system would support 73 sites with septic connections, which was understood to be the total allowed under the existing use permit U 1972-30. Environmental Health has recently learned that Wildwood now has 51 sites with full sewer connection, and 23 sites without sewer connections. Using current EPA sizing criteria, the potential flow rates were calculated on the assumption that the 51 sites with septic connections can generate 100 gallons of wastewater per day, and the 24 without septic connections can generate 50 gallons of wastewater per day. So we come up with 5,100 plus 1,200 for a total of 6,800 gallons per day. This expanded flow will require the prompt installation of the 1,600 gallon backup system. And so we couple that design approach with, on my last day of working for the county on June 2nd, I wrote another memo summarizing a recent series of visits to the site. And there are no pumps on the, there are no wastewater flow meters on these systems. But the best indicator available to us was the amount of water consumed at the site. Water in, water out. Pretty simple, pretty crude, but it's really a fairly reliable method of monitoring septic use. And based on the information provided me by the manager of the site, I found that the water usage ranged from a high of 4,073 gallons per day to a low of 2,179 gallons per day. And so going back without that 1,600 gallon backup installation, going back to what is in the ground right now, the ability to handle 5,100 gallons per day, we found that the average consumption, the average daily wastewater water usage for the entire year was 3,091 gallons per day, which is 75.4% of the septic capacity. A very long trip around the block to get to the answer to your question. And I apologize for the lengthy answer. Yes and no. Yes, from a purely theoretical design perspective, probably we are operating, the number of active sites probably are in excess of the septic capacity. But no, in terms of the way that the system is being used, and my visits to the site confirmed that the systems were operating properly. There was no surfacing of effluent from the ground. The answer is no. Those 6 sites did not cause did not overburden the system that's installed. To come back, really, that's great. That's good news that everything's working well. But environmental health has a responsibility to make sure that everything meets proper design criteria and is code compliant. And so at the end of the day, and this is a common conundrum that we face, at the end of the day, even though things are working really well, you still have to meet the letter of the law. So yeah, the approved 1,600 gallon backup would need to be installed to support those 6 sites that that you're talking about. I should probably just let that go as my answer. Although if I've created more confusion, I apologize, and I'll stay here to answer more questions. Thank you.
Thank you. That was clarifying.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I'd like to just ask one more. Juliana, have you contacted anybody from social services that knows about the conditions and the situation at the campground?
Not formally. I have not formally. Though I do work with people in my building who are in social services and interact with them. I have heard informally children live at the campground, school bus stops. I've seen the school bus stop at the campground. I have heard from the property owner that Child Protective Services does come out to the campground to meet with particular households about issues that they may have. That's about all I really can share.
Yeah. I hope the time it comes back, maybe you've had some contact with social service and see if they have anything that would inform us about the situation.
Okay.
The owner maybe will tell us more, but it seems to me, living there on the coast and seeing the campground change over the years, that it's kind of happened gradually, that more people have needed long-term places to stay, and I've been acquainted with a couple of people that have lived there, and they and the people that care about them are very grateful that they have a place and aren't on the street. So maybe social services has a perspective also.
Right. I very much appreciate your comments, as this has been something we've talked about as staff a great deal over the last 5 years. We really have looked to hear from the Planning Commission where they land on this so that we can craft recommendations that respond to where the Planning Commission would like to see this use permit go.
Great. We need really good campgrounds for tourists. But I think because of the way this has already evolved, we may be kind of committed to trying to keep this going in another direction, or some of it.
Thank you.
And if you want the reinforcement, I also feel great concern about what would happen if the letter of the law put all these people out on the street. I don't see the housing capacity on the coast to really absorb them elsewhere. So I'm glad I don't have your job. With that, are there any other questions for staff? If not, we would like to hear from the applicant, if the applicant would care to speak.
Good morning. My name is Lee Exum. I'm the owner of Wildwood Campground, Fort Bragg. I really don't know where to start on this. There's so much involved here, but I would like to thank the staff and Dave Jensen for their input. We've been working with Juliana, and I've known Dave for years because I also own another park in the area. But let me just begin by a couple of comments here, and then I can answer questions or do whatever we're going to do. We have come today expecting an approval of our application for an extension of our original conditional use permit. We have studied and discussed with county staff the issues and the new proposed conditions for this, and we are willing to continue to work with them to resolve some of the issues you've been hearing today. We applied for this continuation 5 years ago, and yet here we are, the first hearing, which concerns us, has concerned us, and it's not Juliana's fault. It's a fault of the whole operation in the county, in my opinion. And I don't mean to condemn everybody that works for the county, but I'm not a young man, and I've been down life's road and know these things come up. Excuse me. I bought this park in 2006 when it was a piece of bare ground. It had been built as a park, and the use permit had been thing, and the man that built it died, and his widow quit running it, and it was just sitting there, not generating revenue for the county or anybody. She let enough people come and park there occasionally to pay the taxes on it, her statement. In order for us to build a viable business, which is I've done all my life, I've owned numerous businesses, we had to take in anybody that come through the door. We were new on the coast and did not realize the drug problems that we're all facing. And I mean all of us that live here. And I live in the park. So we started taking people in, and then the first thing we know, we're not getting paid, and we end up with evictions and all of this. Let me jump forward to probably 2010, 11. I had to make a change in management, which I did, and brought in my present manager. And that's when things began to change. And we have had to evict almost every other week since then, and turnover, and yet we had to continue to have money to operate, which we have been successful at. We haven't made much money, but we've been able to improve the park. We've built, had the electrical system completely rebuilt and paid for. We have, as you heard from Dave, added a great amount of septic. And so we have a viable operation now, but we are still dealing with this drug problem and all that's associated with it. We feel that we have made tremendous progress, and we will continue to work in that direction. But there is a need, and I have my manager, who happens to be my daughter, Kay Ekstrom, here. Don't confuse the last names. They're not the same. My wife's maiden name was Ekstrom. She took her mother's maiden name after a change of marriage. But she's done a great job of managing this park. She has a business education and business experience. But above all that we're talking about here today is something you mentioned. We've tried to provide a safe place for families to live, and we do have families in the park, and at the same time maintain a campground. And consequently, several years ago, we made a decision to split the campground, basically, and retain as many of the good low-income people as we could. My daughter has spent many, many hours working with social welfare, child protective services, Social Security, and all of these issues, and trying to improve things and trying to help the people that live there. Some of them appreciate it, some of them don't. What breaks my heart, and I'm speaking personally now, is to see these children. Some of them come into the park only babies and grow up there. And we work all the time to try to make it safe for them, try to work with the families when we can. And it's at times heartbreaking, to say the least. I grew up without a father, so I know what it's like. But I also grew up a long time ago, which we didn't have the drug problems we have today. Anyhow, that's enough preaching at you. My daughter tells me I talk too much, but anyhow, the things I've shared with you are the background of this whole thing. We stand here today asking you to approve of the continued use of this piece of property as part of it as a low-income housing. We do have considerable camping. There's not been much said about this, but in the summer we're full. People love to come and tent, and we have a whole group of tent sites that are way down in the woods, and they use the bathhouse. That's what it's for. We've heard the statement that Mendocino County wants to provide great camping for the visitors. Well, we do too. I have 65 acres of redwoods there. I live on the property myself. I have an invalid wife that I care for, so don't get involved in much of the day-to-day operation except things like this. But I love the site. I would love to go ahead and develop it for more of the tent siting has become a big issue in the last, it's increased in the last 5 years drastically. People come and they like to go down in among the trees and we have enough room, we can spread them out. We could do a whole lot more but I'm too old to take on another major project, to be real honest. Anyhow, I don't know where to start as far as the issues that have been brought up. My question is, are you going to act on this request for today, or are we not going to get an issue and an answer until whatever it was, May?
We haven't discussed that yet, but we'll discuss that in deliberations.
Because if you're going to act on it today, maybe I ought to answer some more of these issues. Is that what you want to hear?
Well, when you've concluded your remarks, sir, we are going to deliberate. So I don't have an answer for you at this moment, but if you're going to remain here, if we have more questions, we could ask you to come up again.
Well, I believe Dave Jensen has dealt with the issue of the septic system and the usage of it and the number of plumbed, as they use the term, sites. And we're asking that we be allowed to retain the 51 sites, actually 53, because the 2 sites my daughter and I live on are technically camping sites, and they have their own separate septic system, which was approved, permitted, and installed within the last year. And that's not even in the calculations that Dave went over. So it would be 53 plumbed sites and 22 non-plumb sites would be what we would be asking for. The issue of the police reports, the security, and the one proposed condition in here that would require us to hire a security patrol, we take drastic issue with. So let me comment on that for a little bit. To start with, the report that's in the papers that you have are old. They're 5 to 8 years old. So it doesn't reflect what's going on now, and Juliana has new figures, which we haven't seen yet. But to start with, we also have staff, and we have staff members who live on. We have an assistant manager who lives at the entrance to the park with her husband and children, 3 children, right at the entrance. She can see everybody that drives in because there's only one entrance. She mans the office when my daughter's not available. We have 2 other staff members who live on the property, men, one a man and his wife, that live right in the park. And they routinely are working in the park. One of the men is in the park way into the night, lots of nights. If we have any issues at all, the people that live there know they can call on any one of this group of people. So we provide security. We are concerned about security. We had a rash of people breaking into coin mechs in our showers here 2 or 3 years ago. Finally found out it was somebody that was living in the park, and they no longer live there now. In fact, they're not allowed in the park. So my point is, I should have stated this to start with, but an outside security patrol would not add anything to what we already do. In fact, it would take away from it. And above everything else, we could not afford it because our profits is not that much. I haven't even tried to talk to anybody about it because I'm sure if we, and the other thing, this proposal in here says from 10 a.m. in the morning till 10 p.m. at night. That's not when the issues are. The issues are 3 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning. So anyhow, not to bore you with all the issues, but the other thing is we've always had a very good relationship with the Sheriff's Department. I've had several sheriffs that come in the park, and I say, "What are you here for?" "Well, we just wanted to drive through and check and see if you got any problems. We're out this way." And they do it routinely, but not on a set schedule, which I think works great. We were very sorry to lose the sheriff that was a friend of ours that we all know about. They got shot here, what, 3 or 4 years ago. Ricky. He was a personal friend of mine. And he went through the park a lot of times anyhow. I'm getting personal now. But we feel with our staff and our attitude and the backup of the Sheriff's Department, we do provide security. That doesn't mean there aren't incidences. That take any 50 families in that small site down somewhere else in town and tell me that you don't have police calls for it. So anyhow, that is the major issues that I have with the proposed conditions as they're presented today. The other comment I will make is regarding this issue of long-term versus camping. To start with, our campground is split at 44 sites. That this is our determination that basically they're long-term. There is turnover, but the other sites from 44 through the end have, sometimes they have long-term in them. People come in and say, "I want to stay a month," or "I want to," and then maybe they stay 3 or 4 months, or maybe they stay 6 months. But those other sites are for camping. They're used for camping. We, even during the winter months, get overnighters, 1 or 2, depending on a holiday. But more to the point of this long-term thing, which I will refer you to Health and Safety Code of the state for campgrounds. County council will want to look at this, but state regulations allow for an exemption, an exception for long-term stays in campgrounds. And this state regulation also states that state regulations overrule county regulations. So we feel we are legal under the state regulation. But we're willing to work with you people, because you're here where we live. And if you work with us, we'll all be happy and make this a successful business, and also take care of some of the low-income people that can't afford to pay $1,000 a month rent. We have had, and we will continue to have, issues with people dragging in or wanting to bring in units that are not licensed, that are cars that I went through the park the other day, and here they had a car all torn apart. I said, "What are you doing?" "Oh, got to fix my oil." I said, "Well, how long is it going to take?" "Oh, I'll have it out tonight." Well, it's still there, but it's not going to be there when I get back to town today. So it's a continual process. But my point is that we do see these things. We do want to clean up the place. I don't like to live in a junk pile. I never have in my life. My mother was very good at that. I grew up on the farm. So anyhow, unless you have some questions, I'm open to questions. I've probably taken enough of your time.
Are there any questions for Mr. Exum?
Yeah, I do have
Yes.
one. What are your thoughts about your ability to add that reserve septic system at some point?
Oh, we can't do it legally until after May. No, it's in our plans. Yeah, it's all engineered, as Dave mentioned, and we will put it in. Yes, we already had plans to before these even come up, but because we have built the park to where we are running at capacity, and so we need to put it out of the system. And like I say, we got 65 acres, and yeah, there's probably 50 of those acres you wouldn't build a septic system on, but I have another septic system already preliminary engineering done on that Dave doesn't even know about, but it was in case we were going to go ahead with what I first started out to add another whole section. And I decided I'm too old to take on a new project. But my point is, we have places on our property where we can add to it necessary.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
And I will say to listen to what you have to say.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now is the time for the public hearing. If there are any members of the public who would like to speak to this topic, this would be the time. I understood there was one speaker card, right? No, okay. Seeing no one, we will close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission.
Well, I'll go.
Okay.
Seeing as how, if I understood you correctly, that the applicant is actively looking to add additional septic capacity that would accommodate those, we'll just call them the extra 6 sites. It seems like the extension of this use permit, wouldn't it need to be for more sites then? Because this is talking about 73 sites. And it seems like the goal here, if we're really working with the applicant and really trying to keep people on site and not kick them off, we would really want to be looking to legally accommodate the 75 sites instead of the 73. So I'm just, again, looking at table 1. And it looks like the Department of Health has only approved the 69, the state's only approved the 69, and this use permit would be for the 73. So in my mind, the question is, how can we get them legally compliant for the 75 sites? And what does that process look like working with the state licensure on this?
If I may, Nash Gonzalez, a mobile home park or an RV campground starts with the county process to obtain a use permit. Once the use permit has been obtained, they refer to it as the entitlement, then the entire facility is turned over to the state. So any improvements that are done within the RV campground or a mobile home park fall under the auspices of the state Department of Housing and Community Development, where we, as the county, regulate the entitlement and the land use, but any improvements would have to go through the state. As far as septic, as far as other things, they defer a lot of that to county environmental health, who is, I would say, the agency that oversees the water quality issues on the local level. With that said, anytime we're dealing with any expansions or modifications at the land use level, we would deal with, but there is a state licensing process and there is a state oversight process, and that's through HCD when it comes to these campgrounds and mobile home parks.
Okay, thank you. And what kind of time frame would we be looking at? Like, let's say that we did want to continue this issue to, what is it, our May 3rd meeting, and this is theoretical, come back with a use permit for 75 campsites instead of the 73. If that needs to run through environmental health and the state, what kind of delay, is that an option, and what kind of time frame are we looking at?
If I may, through the chair, I think part of the process here is to determine how to best move forward with looking at how do we accommodate these long-term rentals. It is a campground by use permit. It is recognized as a campground. Now we're looking at what has happened here over time and how to best find the best solution. So we will be reaching out to the state. Part of what needs to happen here is, are there provisions that would allow for the long-term occupancy? This is considered a resource land upland residential, and typically the zoning code allows for a percentage of permanent units when you consider such use. The question is, does it fit that definition? And have there been any changes at the HCD level that would allow us to look at this, or will it require a rezoning? Will it require some sort of other entitlement? So that's part of the process that we have to go through. And I guess in answer to Commissioner Purnell's question is, would we be able to bring something back by May 5th or May 3rd? I don't know. It's going to depend on what we uncover and what state regulations would allow us to do or not allow us to do. And then, do we come back with those options to the Planning Commission? Do we come back with a partial approval? That's something that we're going to have to be looking at. But yes, we hear what the Commission is saying, to find a way to take a look at these long-term units and make them best fit. And that's what we're going to be working on, is how do we achieve that? Because that is a housing problem on the coast, and something that we do need to address. And the other thing too is, this is no different than a lot of what we've seen up and down the 101 corridor with a lot of these transient habitation facilities, such as motels and motor courts that have been turned into long-term housing. Those at least have been able to do so because they have been zoned appropriately. But this is a resource parcel, upland residential, and I would assume that it's next to forest land, so we need to take a look at this much more closely.
Yes.
A short comment. If we're going to continue this, it seems to me that the numbers are going to change, and what we have to discuss will change. So a lot of this discussion perhaps will turn around and be negated by the conversation that is results from the changes.
I'll just pipe in and say that I think we need the continuance to May 3rd just so that we can digest all this, but I feel like we're kind of on the same page with staff of wanting to figure out some way to make this work, if at all possible.
Yeah. And I think the extension, the continuation is essential to get it right so that we have some kind of possible solution. And it'll take a little time.
Motion?
So
I move we could.
I think we might be ready for a motion.
okay. So I'll move that we continue UR 2013-0002 to the May 3rd Planning Commission meeting.
Second.
Commissioner Hall,
Yes.
Commissioner Warner,
Yes.
Commissioner Purnell,
Yes.
Commissioner Nelson,
Yes.
Commissioner Kruger,
Yes.
Chair Holdcamp.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0.
And we will be taking a short recess here before the next item. Let's take 10 minutes.
Nixon, flag the gold window set. Oh, we're done.
I think you're here to do this one. And we will move to case R 2017-007, and it looks like Jesse's going to be up here.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Jesse Davis, Planner 3. This morning I'll be presenting to you Rezone 2017-0007. This is a rezone of 20 acres from Rural Residential 5 to Rural Residential 10. This is a down zone which limits the current development potential of this site. The subject property is approximately 1 mile east of Booneville on the west side of Ornbaum Road. It's addressed at 13016 Ornbaum Road in Booneville. Again, it is a 20-acre site. There is currently no residence on the subject parcel, but there are approved leach fields, 1 permitted well, and 1 issued well permit. Currently, a small shed exists on the site, along with improvements to facilitate future residential development, although at this time, no housing unit is present. Surrounding parcel uses are timber production zone, rural residential 5, as well as forest land. An additional note regarding why general plan is not required for this particular rezone application. Currently, the site maintains 20 acres. A general plan amendment is not required for this rezone, given that the current acreage still meets the existing RR5 general plan requirement of a 5-acre minimum. A general plan amendment is only required when the minimum parcel size allowed by zoning is smaller than the minimum parcel size specified by the general plan classification. Given that this site still satisfies the RR5 general plan requirement, no general plan amendment is required. Potentially, this would make any subsequent rezone back to RR5 a little bit easier. At this stage, staff would recommend approval of this rezone, and I'm happy to address any questions you may have. Commissioner Hall.
I have a question. Maybe it's a correction, because I live just on the other side of the creek, and I think you've got your directions. If you look at the large-scale map, the parcel is pretty obviously west of Booneville rather than east.
Thank you. That is correct.
I giving you the credit, I scratched my head and went.
I appreciate that correction, Commissioner. I will make sure that that is updated in our legal description.
Other than that, I don't have any problem. The downzoning doesn't come up very often.
It really doesn't, no.
Any other comments or questions? Is the applicant here? Would the applicant care to speak on the topic?
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Javier Rao with Round Associates representing Mr. Obuliak, the applicant, and we agree with the staff recommendations and report. And I can answer any questions if you have any.
Are there any questions?
Really, I'll just make a comment, I guess, and that's that I think this is sort of what I thought might happen, wanting to see some sites for cannabis out of ag and out of rangeland and out of timberland into upland residential, RR5s, RR10s. So this is great.
I think we might, I guess I need to open a public hearing and allow members of the public to comment on this. Seeing none, I think we can close the public hearing, and thank you, Mr. Rao.
Thank you.
If there are any other questions, I hope you'll stay a moment. But I don't know. You ready to make a motion?
Sure. I move the recommended motion.
Second?
Commissioner Purnell,
Yes?
Commissioner Hall,
Yes.
Commissioner Kruger,
Yes.
Commissioner Nelson,
Yes.
Commissioner Warner,
Yes.
Chair Holdcamp.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0.
Okay, thank you. And then I believe we have one set of minutes. I think, though, we first need to do any matters from staff.
No,
No matters from staff. Are there any other matters from commission members?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So I just recently attended a meeting where Tom Allman gave us a report on the fire conditions. And one of the things that was a surprise to me was that the fire chief in Potter Valley has the option and took the option to close the power grid. And which, you know, was a typical policy moving decision to prevent any more fires from starting as a result of the wind. And but as a consequence, all the power to the antennas was turned off, so there was no communication. And I know we review antenna permits as they come due, and I think it might be something that we should consider and staff might look into, is to require all the antennas to have power backups, either propane or diesel, and to where they'd automatically come on, so that all these antennas wouldn't be just shut down. So I hope I understood it correctly.
If I may, Mary Lynn Hunt, I know that we are currently, and have been for probably the last 6 to 8 months, processing quite a few administrative permits for placement of generators at many cell tower sites. So I think this might be addressing that issue.
Well, that's great news.
Okay.
And so my follow-up question would be, will those generators automatically power up when the electricity goes off?
Okay, we can certainly add that. Thank you.
I would just like to also put out there for people who are interested in this issue that NCO is sponsoring a series of radio operator classes, because that was one of the really good ways that people did communicate when the power grid was down. And so if there are people who are interested in that in your community, they could be directed to those classes. And I know there's some scheduled, one on the coast and one in Ukiah, but I'm sure they would schedule more if there were more interest. So
were these for ham
yeah.
radios? Yeah, because that was the one effective method
yes,
of communicating.
and so they're teaching it, and they're also doing a licensing class. So you can actually, at the end of the class, for a $15 testing fee, get the license to operate. So that'd be something maybe the county, if people are inquiring, could direct people to as well, because I think that was a useful thing. And I think in our rural area, with the multiple kinds of conditions that we have, every alternative that we have, including the generators, but also including the more citizen-operated communications methods, would be good.
Would you just share a little bit about some of the other items that Sheriff Holman is proposing? Are sirens. He wants to go back to good old days where you can crank a siren. I don't know if that's something that'll come to the planning commission or not, but he was looking for some funding, which I'm the president of the Mendocino County Foundation, and so that's somewhere where we may step in a little bit and provide grants to get these sirens working. Ham radios, cell towers. The other big issue is, and I forget the name of the mountain, but as you're looking north towards Willits, you'll see an antenna up there on that mountain, and that's like the prime communication antenna for the county and for I think fire and sheriffs, and it burnt twice.
Laughlin antenna, Laughlin Hill there.
Laughlin Peak, yeah.
Yeah, Laughlin Peak, and so the fire came through as the winds were blowing west, and it hadn't been, the grass hadn't been under control, and so it probably burned up a bunch of wires and whatnot. And then it turned and it blew back the other way, and you know, after they had repaired it, burned it again. So it wasn't in commission. At this point, all the information, all the wiring and communication equipment is in a concrete building. And I don't know if that's something that we need to do with the other cell towers, or if maybe we just need to police it better to make sure that the undergrowth is controlled for the antennas. But that was the problem with that one, is the grass and the brush hadn't been controlled, and so the fire burnt right up to it.
It's interesting that in the past, we've always tried to disguise these stations by planting shrubs all around them. And now we're advocating that all that vegetation be cleared back.
Yeah,
gone full cycle.
Yeah, and out in farther away from subdivision and housing and whatnot, I don't think there's any need for camouflage bushes or trees to be grown. So that's something to consideration. I think most where we've encouraged these are where there's houses nearby and probably where the fire trucks can get to them sooner. But yeah, that is ironic.
Well, in regard to that, where we've required that they disguise them as trees, what is that material made of? Is that a combustible material where you put the branches on them?
Mary Lynn Hunt, I don't have any idea. I mean, to me, when I've seen it, we've had a branch in the office. It looks like it was plastic and wire, is what it looked like. So, it's something to withstand,
like
structural,
made out of aluminum or something
so,
like that. They don't
probably
look
melt,
combustible.
if not burn.
Well, one of the issues that Sheriff Allman spoke of was to clear low-hanging branches. And so if these fake tree towers have the branches that are pretty high up, perhaps that's one solution to
they
that.
are. They're usually you don't start seeing the branches till it's higher up in the
20,
view line.
25 feet. Mm-hmm. So that's all I have to offer.
Interesting. Anybody else? Okay, we do have one set of minutes, and I understand we have received some corrections from Commissioner Ogle before she left town. I saw one on page 4, the second thing where it says Chair Holtkamp asked if a motion is needed, I think was the only correction I noted here. Are there other corrections from other commissioners?
Yeah, I saw one on page 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th paragraph down. Matt's comments stated that he had a recommendation prepared, if we add an ED and scratch that, prepared for placing, we scratch MENT and replace it with ING. The modifications in the resolution. He had a recommendation prepared for placing the modifications in the resolution. Would make a little more sense.
Say that again.
So it would read, for placing, so we eliminate the meant.
It's in the first part of the sentence. Yes.
Placing and then delete of, placing the, and then go on, modifications.
Got it, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, with that, we just need a motion.
I move we retire.
No, we have to adopt
Done
the
that
rules
already.
first. Nice try, but you're premature.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
All in favor of adopting the October 5th minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, now go.
I move that we adjourn.
All opposed, duck.
Yeah.